The air in the armory at forward operating base Cinder was a tangible thing. It was a cocktail of odors mixed by the relentless Afghan sun and the ceaseless churn of military enterprise. The dominant note was the sharp, metallic tang of CLP gun oil, a scent as sacred to the men here as incense in a cathedral. Underneath that lay the acrid bite of diesel fumes from the generators that powered this small slice of American imperium. The dusty dryness of the Helmand province itself, which coated every surface in a fine, gritty powder, and the faint, sour smell of stale sweat baked into the very concrete of the floor. It was a place of stark, brutalist function, a library where all the books were bound in steel and their stories ended in a muzzle flash. The walls were corrugated metal, the lighting a series of humming, unforgiving fluorescent bars that bleached all color from the room, leaving only shades of gray and olive drab. Here, in this sanctum of lethality, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Rourke was the high priest, and the gospel he preached was the absolute, unyielding letter of Marine Corps regulation. Rourke was a man carved from the same hard material as the institution he served. His face was a roadmap of 2 decades spent in the harshest corners of the world, a topography of sun-creased lines around the eyes and a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts. His arms, covered in a tapestry of faded blue and red ink, were thick as railroad ties, and he moved through his armory with the proprietary swagger of a king surveying his domain. Every weapon on the racks was his, not legally, but spiritually. He knew their quirks, their histories, the precise number of rounds each had fired. He was, in his own mind and in the eyes of the young Marines who served under him, the physical embodiment of unshakable authority. His voice was a gravelly bark, accustomed to being obeyed without question, a tool he used to shape the malleable clay of new recruits into hardened instruments of war. Today, however, there was a discordant note in his symphony of order, a single, irritating anomaly that drew his eye and his ire. She sat on a small wooden stool in the far corner, a space typically reserved for the disassembly of particularly stubborn machine guns. She was an island of quiet in his ocean of controlled noise. She wore a simple, dust-colored set of civilian trekking pants and a plain gray t-shirt that had seen better days. No rank, no insignia, no identifying marks of any kind. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, functional ponytail, and a pair of nondescript glasses were perched on her nose. She looked like a lost aid worker, a misplaced journalist, or perhaps one of the intelligence analysts who occasionally wandered out of their air-conditioned containers, blinking in the real-world sun. She was, in Rourke's immediate and uncharitable assessment, a civilian, a soft, out-of-place thing in his hard, professional world. Her posture was what initially snagged his attention. It was one of absolute stillness. Not the fidgety, uncomfortable stillness of someone who knew they were trespassing, but the deep, centered calm of a predator resting between hunts. And then he saw what she was holding. It was the M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, but not just any M2010. This was Valkyrie, a custom-built weapon system from the Tier 1 asset locker. A rifle so finely tuned and absurdly expensive that Rourke himself had to sign his name in blood on 3 separate forms just to look at it. It was a sacred object, a tool of almost mythical lethality, and this woman was holding it across her lap as casually as if it were a bag of groceries. She was running a delicate finger along the seam of the advanced polymer chassis, her head tilted with an air of clinical curiosity. For Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, this was not just a breach of protocol. It was blasphemy. It was a desecration of his temple. He strode across the concrete floor, his boots making heavy, deliberate impacts that announced his approach. The two young lance corporals at the checkout window, both of whom idolized Rourke, stopped their work to watch. They knew the signs. The gunny had his correctional look on. This was going to be educational. "Hey!" Rourke's voice was not a question. It was a hook, baited and thrown. "You!" The woman did not look up immediately. She finished her slow, tactile examination of the rifle's stock, her focus absolute. Only when her finger came to a rest did she raise her head. Her eyes, when they met his, were a cool, dispassionate gray, like a winter sky over a frozen lake. There was no alarm in them, no deference, no fear. There was nothing but a calm, patient waiting. "This is a restricted area, ma'am," Rourke said, deliberately lacing the last word with a condescending drawl. "Lost your way from the PX?" She offered no reply. Her silence was a vacuum, and Rourke, a man who thrived on noise and reaction, rushed to fill it. "That," he said, pointing a thick finger at the rifle in her lap, "is government property, highly classified government property. You do not have the clearance to be in the same room as that rifle, let alone breathe on it. So I'm going to need you to put it down, very slowly, and then explain to me exactly who you are and what in the hell you think you're doing in my armory." The woman's gaze flickered from his eyes to the rifle, then back again. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips, the kind of sound one makes when faced with a tedious but necessary task. She shifted her grip on the weapon, her hands moving with an easy, ingrained familiarity that sent a tiny, dissonant signal to the back of Rourke's brain, a signal he promptly ignored. "I am where I need to be," she said. Her voice was quiet, even, devoid of any emotional inflection. It was a simple statement of fact. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it staggered Rourke. He was used to two responses from civilians: nervous babbling or immediate, terrified compliance. This placid self-assurance was a language he did not speak. It angered him. It felt like mockery. "You are where I tell you to be," he snarled, taking another step forward, deliberately invading her personal space. He leaned over her, casting her in his shadow. The smell of his sweat and the cheap coffee on his breath filled the air. "And right now, I'm telling you to put my rifle down." She did not flinch. She did not lean back. Her eyes remained locked on his, her expression unchanged. It was like trying to intimidate a stone. He felt his face flush with heat, the anger rising in his chest. He was being defied, openly, in front of his men. His authority was being challenged by this nothing of a woman. "I'm observing the operational readiness of this unit's special equipment," she stated, again as if reading from a report. "This particular asset has a documented cold-bore shot deviation of 0.15 mils at 1,000 meters. I find that unacceptable." The technical jargon, spoken with such effortless precision, was another jarring note. But Rourke was too far down the path of his righteous indignation to process it. All he heard was criticism. This woman, this civilian, was critiquing his armory, his rifle. "You don't know a damn thing about—" he started, his voice rising in volume. He reached down, his hand closing over the barrel of the Valkyrie, intending to wrench it from her grasp. It was like trying to pull a root from the earth. The rifle didn't move. Her hands, which had looked so relaxed, were now locked onto the chassis with a grip of tempered steel. He pulled harder, his knuckles white. The woman's body didn't even shift on the stool. She was anchored, a part of the very foundation of the building. Her gaze never left his, and for the first time, he saw something flicker in their gray depths. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, almost weary disappointment. The sight of his gunnery sergeant in a physical struggle with a small, unarmed woman sent a ripple of confusion through the two lance corporals. This wasn't the usual script. Rourke, red-faced and furious, let go. His ego wouldn't allow him to be seen in a prolonged tug-of-war. He straightened up, his chest heaving. The humiliation was a hot coal in his stomach. He bellowed, his voice echoing off the metal walls, a desperate reassertion of his dominance. Who authorized this? Who let her in here? How did she even get that rifle? He spun around to face his subordinates, his finger jabbing at them. I want answers. Now. Before either of the stunned Marines could stammer out a reply, the world dissolved into a single ear-splitting shriek. The klaxons. Not the wavering, almost lazy sound of the weekly readiness drill, but the frantic, high-pitched, unbroken scream of a Condition 1 alert. A real-world, incoming threat. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the armory into the eerie, blood-red glow of the emergency lighting. The sound was a physical blow, a shockwave that reset every priority in the room. For a moment, everyone froze. Then, training took over. The lance corporals scrambled for the weapons racks, their movements jerky with adrenaline. Rourke, his face now pale under the red lights, spun towards the communications console, his personal confrontation forgotten, replaced by a much larger, more existential fear. Watchtower, this is Armory. What's your status, over? He yelled into the handset. Static. Tosi, this is Armory. Give me a sit rep. Over. More static, punctuated by the faint, garbled screams of a distant firefight. The base was under attack. A complex, coordinated attack. The comms were down. Chaos was the new commander. Rourke's mind, so brilliant at navigating the rigid channels of peacetime procedure, began to short-circuit. He started shouting orders, but they were reflexive, not strategic. Seal the doors! Issue 30-06 to the reaction force. Someone get me the base commander on the line. His orders were useless. The doors were already sealed by protocol. The reaction force used 5.56, not the older ammunition he'd defaulted to under pressure. And the base commander was likely in the same state of communicative blackout as he was. Rourke was a master of a carefully controlled environment. In the heart of true chaos, his authority, built on bluster and regulation, was proving to be a hollow shell. He was shouting into the storm, and the storm was not listening. And then a new sound cut through the noise. It was not loud. It was a calm, precise series of clicks and snaps. Rourke turned. The woman was on her feet. The Valkyrie rifle was no longer in one piece. In a blur of motion that seemed to defy the frantic energy in the room, she had broken it down on the small stool. With the economical grace of a surgeon, she swapped out the long-range scope for a hybrid holographic sight with a magnifier, replaced the bipod with a forward grip, and attached a low-profile infrared laser. She was reconfiguring a sniper system for close-quarters battle. A task that should have taken a trained armorer 10 minutes. She did it in 90 seconds. Her hands moved with a liquid certainty, a muscle memory so profound it was no longer conscious thought. She slammed a fresh magazine into the well, the sound a sharp, definitive crack in the din. She slung the rifle over her shoulder. Then she turned to the senior communications rack, a piece of equipment Rourke's men were forbidden to touch. It was the direct satellite uplink to SOCOM. She bypassed the standard interface, pulling a small, coiled wire from a pocket in her pants and plugging it directly into a maintenance port. Her fingers flew across a small, handheld keypad she produced from another pocket, typing in a string of alphanumeric code so long and complex it looked like a line of ancient scripture. The SATCOM unit, which had been stubbornly dead, whirred to life with a green, healthy glow. She lifted a lightweight headset to her ear and began to speak. Her voice was the same as before, calm, even, and utterly devoid of panic. But the content of her words was a foreign language of pure, high-level command. "Wraith is active," she said, her voice a quiet blade cutting through the noise. "All stations, this net. Authenticate Sierra Niner Bravo. I have hostile contact. 3 elements. Coordinated assault. Primary target appears to be the TOC and the airfield. They are using local jammers. Shift all air assets to frequency-hopping channel Echo Gold. Immediately." Rourke and the 2 lance corporals stood frozen, their mouths agape. They were watching a ghost. Wraith was a call sign spoken in hushed, reverent tones, a legend attached to the shadowy architect of some of the most successful and most secret operations of the last decade. It was a name without a face, a commander who supposedly directed battles from a bunker half a world away. It was not a person who sat on a stool in their armory. The woman continued, her eyes scanning a schematic of the base she seemed to have conjured from memory. "Watchtower 2 is compromised. I need gunship Paladin 1 to execute immediate fire mission, danger close, on grid 4-8-1-5-6-6, suppressing fire only. Tell them danger, close is authorized by me. I want a Predator drone retasked from Sector Gamma to provide overhead imagery. I need to see their command and control element. It will be located away from the main assault, likely on the high ground to the northeast." She paused, listening to a voice only she could hear. "Affirmative. The assault on the main gate is a feint. The real target is the C-17 on the tarmac. It's carrying sensitive cargo. Divert Delta Company from the barracks and have them establish a defensive perimeter around the aircraft. No one gets within 100 meters. Acknowledge." She was not giving suggestions. She was orchestrating a symphony of violence with the cool, detached air of a master conductor. She was seeing the entire battlefield, anticipating the enemy's moves, and counter-moving with a speed and clarity that was nothing short of supernatural. She was running the defense of the entire base from a corner of the armory, using a classified communications net that Rourke didn't even know existed. The spell was broken by the armory door being thrown open with a violent clang. A figure stood silhouetted against the red emergency lights of the corridor. He was a mountain of a man, his uniform immaculate despite the chaos. On his collar were the 3 chevrons and 4 rockers of a sergeant major. It was Sergeant Major Cole, the senior enlisted man on the entire base, a living legend who had been in more firefights than Rourke had had hot meals. His face was a mask of grim fury. "Who the hell is countermanding my orders and running a shadow command net on my base?" he roared, his eyes sweeping the room, looking for some upstart captain or rogue intel officer. Then his eyes fell on the woman. The fury on his face did not just vanish. It was replaced by an expression of such profound, instantaneous shock that it seemed to physically rock him back on his heels. His jaw went slack. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in dawning, horrified recognition. He did not hesitate. He did not ask a single question. His body, conditioned by 30 years of unwavering military discipline, reacted before his conscious mind could catch up. He slammed his feet together, his spine ramrod straight, his entire massive frame locking into the most rigid, formal position of attention he had ever assumed in his life. He took a deep breath, and his voice, which seconds before had been a roar of rage, came out as a thunderclap of pure, unadulterated respect that shook the very walls of the armory. "Attention on deck!" The command was a physical force. Rourke and the two lance corporals, who had been staring dumbly at the scene, snapped to attention by pure Pavlovian reflex. Their backs straightened, their chins tucked, their eyes locked forward. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the quiet, calm voice of the woman speaking into her headset and the distant, reassuring thud of Paladin 1's cannons beginning their fire mission on the exact grid she had specified. Sergeant Major Cole stood locked at attention, his eyes fixed on the woman. He did not move a muscle. He simply waited. She finished her transmission. "Wraith out!" She removed the headset, coiled the wire with the same precise efficiency she did everything else, and turned to face the four men, who now stood like statues in her presence. She looked at the sergeant major, a flicker of acknowledgement in her cool gray eyes. "At ease, Sergeant Major," she said. Cole relaxed, but only fractionally. He addressed her, his voice still thick with a deference that bordered on religious awe. "Ma'am, we had no idea you were on site. Your arrival wasn't on any manifest." "That was the point, Sergeant Major," she replied. She then let her gaze drift over to Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, who was now visibly trembling, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. The entire world had just tilted on its axis, and he was struggling to find his footing. The Sergeant Major followed her gaze. He saw Rourke, and a flicker of understanding and immense pity crossed his face. He knew Rourke. He knew his reputation. And he could guess with sickening accuracy exactly what had transpired in the moments before the attack. He cleared his throat and made the formal introduction that was no longer necessary, but which protocol demanded. His voice was low, grave, and directed squarely at the shattered gunnery sergeant. "Gunnery Sergeant Rourke," he said, his words slow and heavy, each one a hammer blow. "May I present Brigadier General Evelyn Madsen, Commander Joint Special Operations Task Force Aurelia, the senior commanding officer for this entire theater of operations." The name, the rank, the title. They didn't just land in the room, they detonated. Brigadier General. Rourke's mind reeled. The sheer galactic scale of his mistake crashed down upon him. He had not just insulted a civilian. He had not just disrespected an officer. He had physically assaulted, publicly humiliated, and attempted to give orders to the single most powerful and important military figure within a 1,000-mile radius. He had danced a jig on the third rail. He had tried to tell a hurricane to be quiet. A wave of nausea washed over him so intense he thought he might be sick. The narrator's voice would later fill in the legend that Rourke could not possibly know. Brigadier General Evelyn Madsen, call sign Wraith, a graduate of West Point at 19. The first woman to pass through the grueling selection process for the Army's most elite direct action unit. She had served for a decade as an operator before her strategic genius became too valuable to risk on the front lines. She planned the missions that toppled regimes, dismantled terrorist networks, and rewrote the maps of entire regions. Her trademark was the unannounced inspection. She would appear, unannounced and in civilian attire, at the most critical and remote outposts under her command, believing that the only way to gauge the true readiness of a unit was to see it when it wasn't expecting to be seen. She didn't read reports. She became the report. The battle for FOB Cinder raged for another 20 minutes, but its outcome had already been decided. Guided by Madsen's omniscient hand, the base's defenders moved with a newfound purpose and precision. The feint at the main gate was crushed, the assault on the airfield was repelled, and the enemy's command and control element, located exactly where she had predicted, was vaporized by a Hellfire missile from the retasked Predator drone. By the time the all-clear sounded, it was less a victory and more of a clinical, systematic extermination. In the aftermath, the armory was once again quiet, save for the humming of the restored main lights. General Madsen stood by the comms rack, receiving final reports. Sergeant Major Cole stood a respectful distance away. The two lance corporals were trying to make themselves as small as possible, wishing the floor would swallow them whole. And then there was Rourke. He remained at the position of attention, his body rigid, his eyes staring at a fixed point on the opposite wall. He was a man awaiting a sentence he knew he richly deserved. His career was over. A court-martial was the best he could hope for. Public disgrace was a certainty. Finally, General Madsen turned her attention to him. She walked over, stopping directly in front of him. She was a foot shorter than him and outweighed by 100 pounds of muscle, yet she seemed to tower over him, her authority and almost physical pressure in the air. She looked him up and down, her expression as clinical and unreadable as ever. "Gunnery Sergeant Rourke," she began, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "Today, you made a series of assumptions. You assumed a person's gender and attire were accurate indicators of their competence and authority. You assumed silence was weakness. You assumed your rank in this small room made you the ultimate arbiter of who belonged and who did not." She took a small step closer. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her soap, a stark contrast to his own terrified sweat. "Your assumptions were not a personal failing, Gunnery Sergeant. They were a tactical one. Your ego prevented you from seeing a potential asset. Your prejudice blinded you to a resource that was, at that moment, sitting 5 feet away from you. In a different scenario, your failure to correctly assess the battle space could have resulted in the catastrophic loss of this entire facility and everyone in it. You did not fail me. You failed your mission." Rourke finally broke. His eyes met hers, and they were filled with a terrible, pleading shame. "General, ma'am, there's no excuse. I am prepared to accept full responsibility for my actions." Madsen watched him for a long moment. She saw the broken pride, the genuine remorse, the terror. She saw a man who had spent 20 years building a suit of armor, only to have it cracked open, revealing the flawed, frightened man inside. "A court-martial would be the easy solution, Gunnery Sergeant," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "It would satisfy the regulations, but it would be a waste of your 20 years of experience. You are an excellent armorer. You know your weapons. What you do not know is how to lead. Not with your voice, but with your judgment." She paused, letting the words sink in. Rourke held his breath. "Therefore," she continued, "you will not be punished. You will be educated. Effective 0600 tomorrow, you are relieved of your duties as chief of this armory. You are reassigned to my personal staff. You will be my new executive assistant." The sentence was so unexpected, so bizarre, that Rourke could only stare at her, uncomprehending. Sergeant Major Cole's eyebrows shot up. "You will carry my gear," Madsen stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You will maintain my personal weapons. You will stand in the corner of every briefing I conduct and every meeting I attend. You will see how command decisions are made. You will observe how intelligence is gathered and assessed. You will learn, firsthand, that the most critical weapon in any conflict is not the rifle in your hands, but the ability to see the world as it is, not as your biases wish it to be. You will learn that authority is not taken by force or volume. It is granted by those who recognize competence. You will learn this lesson, Gunnery Sergeant, until it is as much a part of you as the rifles on these walls. Is that understood? Rourke could only manage a choked, hoarse whisper. Crystal clear, ma'am. The story of that day passed into the lore of the special operations community. It became a teaching tool, a modern fable told to new officers and senior NCOs alike. The story of Madson's gunny was a stark and powerful reminder. Do not judge by appearances, substance over style. The quietest person in the room is often the one you should be listening to the most. Years passed. Brigadier General Evelyn Madsen became Lieutenant General Evelyn Madsen, her legend only growing. And Gunnery Sergeant Rourke? He served his sentence for 2 full years, a silent, hulking shadow at Madsen's side. He saw things he could never have imagined, from high-level diplomatic negotiations in sterile embassies to tense, clandestine meetings in dusty back alleys. He saw how General Madsen could command the loyalty of a 4-star general and a tribal elder with the same quiet, unshakable confidence. He saw her brilliance, her courage, and her profound humanity. He was, as she had promised, educated. The final scene of the fable takes place a decade later at the Marine Corps Staff Non-Commissioned Officer Academy in Quantico. An instructor stands before a class of newly promoted gunnery sergeants. He is older now, his face more deeply lined, but his imposing physical presence is tempered by a quiet, thoughtful gravity. He is Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Rourke, one of the most respected instructors at the Academy, known for his wisdom and his uncanny ability to see the true potential in his students. He stands before them now, not to teach them about weapons or tactics, but about leadership. And he does so by telling them a story about his own greatest failure. There will come a time, he says, his voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the bark he once employed, when your authority will be challenged. It will not be by an enemy with a rifle. It will be by something you do not understand, a person who does not fit your preconceived notions of what power looks like. You will be tempted to respond with volume, with anger, with the weight of your rank. I am here to tell you that when that moment comes, you must do the opposite. You must be quiet. You must listen. You must observe, because your assumptions are your biggest vulnerability. Your ego is a liability your Marines cannot afford. He pauses, and his eyes look past the young faces in front of him, back across the years to a dusty armory lit in the red glow of emergency lights. The greatest lesson I ever learned, he concludes, his voice filled with a reverence that has not faded with time, is that true strength is quiet. True authority is earned, not declared. And the most dangerous person on any battlefield is the one you underestimated. He lets the lesson hang in the air, a truth forged in the crucible of his own profound humiliation, now offered as a gift to a new generation. A lesson from the day the gunny met the Wraith, and in doing so, finally learned what it meant to be a leader of Marines.